Hey everybody, welcome to the Blendr Report, where news meets rational thinking. I'm your host, Jonathan Harvey. This is your co-host, Liam DeBoer. Liam, what's up, dude?
Not too much, brother. Today we are going to be chatting about a mainstream media analyst calling for a global authority to police online misinformation, a study showing that most trans kids are just confused as almost all grow out of it, the bird flu pandemic fear-mongering ramping up, over 28,000 foreign fugitives with active deportation orders missing in Canada, with 410 of them having criminal records, Toronto Mayor Olivia Chow pausing the rain tax consultations after becoming an international laughingstock, and CBC executives receiving $15 million in taxpayer-funded bonuses amidst 800 job cuts. However, if before we get into things, you wouldn't mind leaving us a kind review on Spotify or subscribing to our YouTube channel wherever you are watching, that would be greatly appreciated. All right, let's get started. So first off, we've got a mainstream media analyst calling for a global authority to police online misinformation. So a recent proposal by CTV News pundit and McGill University scholar Raphael Melancon has raised serious concerns about freedom of speech and government overreach. Melancon suggests the creation of an intergovernmental body similar to Interpol to monitor the internet for misinformation and enforce online regulations on a global scale. Melancon also called for stricter regulations on journalists, including licensing them and revoking their licenses if they spread quote-unquote fake news. So is outright global censorship just an inevitability at this point?
Yeah, I mean, does this guy not realize it sounds like the Ministry of Truth? It's pretty wild when you hear these guys saying these things out loud. And I mean, look, I think it is inevitable. You know, governments, whether they're left or they're right, they want control. And we've seen this throughout history, and we're seeing this across the world right now, whether it's a left-wing government in Canada or a right-wing government in the UK. They're all sort of playing the same game. So I think it's very inevitable, unfortunately. It's also historically predetermined. So when you look at print, you look at radio, you look at the mainstream media, you know, at one time or another, it was independent. Then eventually it was basically overtaken by large corporations and governments working with one another. So there's clearly a pattern here, right? And I don't see why this would be any different. What do we do next, I guess, is the question a lot of people might have. And, you know, because this is very much a cat and mouse game, right? So I'm of the mind that it's the free market's job to find another solution, you know, whether that be using, you know, blockchain, which you and I have discussed before, or maybe, you know, having a lot of smaller independent platforms. Blockchain is really interesting, but I think the adoption to the technology might be a bit of a hurdle to overcome for a lot of people. So the other solution that might be better is, you know, think about it this way: instead of having, you know, 5 or 6 really big social platforms, you've got smaller groups of people on smaller platforms. But the thing is, it's a lot easier to police speech on all of those platforms. So now that I'm kind of saying it out loud, that is actually a much better solution maybe in the short term, where people do start these little communities. You see it all the time. People have websites where they start these communities online. And maybe that's the direction we need to go to, you know, sort of continue running away from the cat being the government, right? You know, when I really consider this as a cat and mouse game, what's more concerning for me is the recent legislation that's sweeping through the West that is attacking individuals for hate speech crimes, because this could theoretically blanket all forms of communication. You know, when they're knocking on your door to ask you about social media posts, you know, you look at Bill C-63 that can throw you in jail for potentially committing a hate speech crime in the future. And you look across the West, it's happening everywhere. So, I mean, my big concern is, you know, no matter what we do with this next step, we may be fighting a much bigger uphill battle than we know.
And what concerns me is what comes after this censorship gets put in place, if they are successful. Because we saw with COVID, I mean, they did everything they could to censor conversations around things like, for instance, the lab leak theory and such, and alternative remedies. But when they put these through, you know that on the other end, they're now going to shove through some sort of crisis point that they can try to seize more control and power with. It really is heating up to a point on all of this censorship to a degree that just can't be ignored now, with Scotland putting forward and actually putting through that hate speech legislation. Ours is still waiting to go through with Bill C-63. But then even Michael Schellenberger, did you see at all what he was breaking from Brazil right now?
Yeah.
That's so crazy, man. So earlier this week, he broke the Brazil Twitter files. So just like he had done earlier and shown how the American government was involved in directly sending to Twitter what posts they wanted to be taken down. We saw it with Alex Berenson, who was somebody that was a vaccine skeptic from the beginning. They were even saying, I'm paraphrasing here, but one of the emails that the White House sent to Twitter was, why is this guy still allowed to use the platform, pretty much, which is...
Yeah, that's about right.
Which is like an infringement on freedom of speech for sure, when you've got a government pressuring a corporation to silence an individual. But then what Schellenberger found in regards to the Twitter files in Brazil was that there is a Supreme Court justice named Alexander de Moraes, and he has thrown people in jail without trial for things they posted on social media. He has demanded the removal of users from social media platforms, and he has required the censorship of specific posts without giving users any right to appeal or even the right to see the evidence presented against them. He also went on to show that they illegally demanded that Twitter reveal personal details about Twitter users who used hashtags they did not like, demanded access to Twitter's internal data in violation of Twitter's own policy. They sought to censor unilaterally Twitter posts by sitting members of Brazil's Congress. And they also sought to weaponize Twitter's content moderation policies against supporters of the then president Bolsonaro. And then now he's even discovering that Musk is pushing back. Pretty much Brazil, in the Supreme Court justice, has said that Twitter needs to block certain popular accounts in Brazil. Elon Musk shot back and said, nope, like, not going to do it. This is wrong. And he said, quote, as a result, we will probably lose all revenue in Brazil and have to shut down our office there. But principles matter more than profit. So Schellenberger said at any moment, Brazil's Supreme Court could shut off all access to X for the people of Brazil. It is not an exaggeration to say that Brazil is on the brink of dictatorship at the hands of a totalitarian Supreme Court justice named Alexander de Moraes. Since taking office, Lula has massively increased government funding of mainstream news media, most of which are encouraging increased censorship as well. And this ties back into that original thing with this news pundit for CTV, which doesn't get as much funding as the CBC, but still, these are government-funded bodies, or at least subsidized bodies, that are pushing for independent voices to be harassed and shut down. And to me, I just look at this and this is a scary entering point. This is the teeter-totter.
Yeah, I mean, look, you see more radical things happen in countries that aren't as stable. That's why you're seeing this in Brazil. We played the same game, but we just played in a more, we dressed it up differently. It's a little more inconspicuous. You know, that's how we like to do things here. But look, it's the same stuff. A lot of our media is state funded, and they want to continue to increase that. And then they want to be able to censor and control all other social platforms. When you look at Bill C-11 and Bill C-18 and Bill C-63 together, that is a very, very strong censorship weapon that attacks everything, every form of communication, even individual. This is massive. It just doesn't look the same way because it doesn't look radical online like what you're seeing here. They're doing it in a more intelligent and honestly more nefarious way because you don't see it coming, but it's going to have a similar effect, right? So people, I think a lot of times they look at this and go, well, good thing we don't live like that. Hey, look, we're not that far away and it's not that different. Mm-hmm. And I think that is sort of speaking to your point where it's the same thing over in the UK. It's the same thing in Australia. It's the same thing, obviously, in Scotland. Like, you know, it's funny. Scotland just implemented that law on Monday, and by Wednesday they had 4,000 complaints. Yeah, in 48 hours. I was like, oh, this is going to be wild. This is where we're going. 4,000 complaints in 48 hours. Okie doke. Let's see how this plays out. We're on the wrong track. We're going there very, very quickly. And global governments are working in unison to create this reality. I think you just see things that look more inflammatory in countries like Brazil because, like I said, they are a little bit more radical, and that's why it appears that way. But the same shit is happening here in Canada. And this is just another example. Like, can you imagine this guy, the fact that he's even given a platform to say something like that and not slapped in the mouth for it is insane to me. That's wild. But we just like, yeah, you know what? That's a good idea. Let's go ahead and do that. No, guys, no, none of this.
Yeah. And it's very easy to get caught in the idea that these things aren't already an issue, because even in the UK, sure, they're ramping up their ability to censor people and trying to push through new legislation for that. But already, like, figures from the Met Police obtained by Radar through a Freedom of Information request shows that 2,405 arrests were made across the offenses in 2021, up 3% from the year before. So, like, already thousands of people are getting arrested for social media posts. And then we also saw recently it come out about how FBI agents are going to people's homes in America for no illegal activities, but merely expressing their opinions online.
Yeah, the old knock and talk.
Yeah.
Okay.
One of them was simply grieving their loss of their cousin and expressed outrage online at a lenient sentence given to the man allegedly guilty of dumping her cousin's body after a drug overdose. And that led to the FBI showing up at her door simply because it got millions of views. And then another guy as well, a business owner and outspoken government critic, had the FBI show up at his doors, and they wouldn't even give him a specific post or anything that he had said in regards to why they were there, but it was much more of just a general show. And the FBI is sitting there. It's insane that they can sit there and say that this isn't connected to the First Amendment at all. But, like, how is this not intimidation?
Well, it's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
That's exactly what it is. And you know, the second person's case there, that guy's case, is actually more concerning, because all that means is they didn't catch wind of a viral post. That means they were just surveilling this dude.
Yeah.
And then just deciding, okay, well, now's the time we're going to go talk to him, which means you think of how these people get access to this information and what they're able to do. And all it means is, hey, you're on someone's radar. That's what, and then look at people like you and I. I'm like, we are 100% being watched by our government, for sure. In fact, something came out the other day. I think I sent it to you. I forget the name of it. I'm so annoyed that it evades me. The government is actively working with a company in Canada to monitor social media personalities and posts. It is happening, and the information is going right back to Canada, and it's on Canada's website. So, I mean, look, we all know this is happening. I mean, I guess, look, you look at these things, you say, is it inevitable? It is inevitable, but the thing is, people won't stand for it. We simply won't. Like, this is being ushered in, right? Because people on the left are being told that you're going to get a platform to talk, and you're progressive, and you're okay, and we're just going to shut up all the bad guys, not realizing that, hey, this is going to work against everyone. That's how they're ushering it in, right? But the reality is, once this is working against everyone, think about what you need to do to enforce it. Because if you shut everyone up, once this is going at every, like, whether you're liberal or Democratic, Republican, conservative, whatever, if you've got people trying to censor your speech every way, shape, or form to everybody, there's only one way to enforce that, and that's with brute force. That's what you need to do. You need some sort of military or militia. Otherwise, people are not going to stand for it at scale. It's not going to work. So for me, I'm kind of like, what's this next step look like? Because to me, we've been playing this game with the government where they pretend like they're our friend, but they're not. But they pretend they are, and they do just enough stuff to convince people that they are. But this kind of opens this new can of worms where you can't play that game anymore. You can't operate under that guise that we're here together. It's like, no, we're in direct opposition. And once the cat is out of that bag, what does that look like? Because enforcing that is going to become extremely violent.
As somebody that reads frequently about totalitarian states of the past, that the inevitable progression through these censorship things is, at first they just start with like re-education or these kind of programs. I mean, we're seeing it in our world. It's the diversity, equity, and inclusion training, right? And then what ends up and then they also create kind of a social sphere of shame and pressure from groups to stamp out individual thoughts and opposing opinions and dissidents. But then when they realize that isn't enough, that doesn't get them what they want, which is total and utter control, then they have to go into that brute force mentality, because they go, okay, well, this isn't working, so now we need to create prison camps. And again, part of Bill C-63 is that you can go to jail for this, right? It's not even hyperbolic to say that this is where they will go if they can. Like, maybe they won't be successful in their aims, but it's where they want to go, is eventually to be able to have people put in prison for opposing views and ideas. And this was even something that Stalin said, man, and it's so crazy, because in a way, he's right, where the more you go down that path of crushing out dissidents, the harder your hand has to become in delivering the blow, because what ends up happening is the people that are left, even though it might be fewer, are better at evading your crackdown. So you actually have to get worse and worse with what your measures.
Yeah, think about like plugging holes. Eventually, it's going to be. I get that. I mean, one thing I'd finish off on this topic to say is communism ruined every society that it infiltrated. It never worked. So when people think, well, we just need to do it right, or it's under a different label, it's going to be no different. It ruins every single society, and it follows the same path if you look down history. So.
And, well, if these things go through, we won't even be able to talk about our next topic, but concerning stuff is coming out, seeing as a study shows that most trans kids are just confused as almost all grow out of it. So a significant study that followed 2,772 children for 15 years found that most kids who identified as transgender eventually stopped feeling that way. The study also noted a significant increase in referrals to gender clinics in recent years, but couldn't pinpoint the exact reason for this rise, speculating that better awareness might be a factor. So, if this isn't the case, where a lot of these kids would continue on and they are truly trapped inside the wrong body, as they claim these kids are, what does justice look like for all the teenagers who have been lied to and gone through life-altering procedures on the basis of this pseudoscience?
Well, here's the thing. The reality is, for the kids that have gone through any sort of transition, there is no justice. For many of them, it's just a life of suffering, whether it's physical or mental. And for the people that didn't even transition, but were sort of told this lie by adults their whole lives and these authority figures, that it's in itself is mentally damaging. Look what you're setting up the next generation of people to do and to deem okay. For me, like I said, there is no real justice. And this study proves that this is just a phase. Like every kid in high school, we all go through phases. Like when we were younger, I mean, I don't know what it was like for you, but we had preppies, we had jocks, we had smokers, we had goths, we had skaters. Everybody's kind of got their own little group of cliques that you remember when you were in high school. And what you would do is you would associate with one of these groups. That's how you would define yourself, right? You'd be one or maybe two of them. And for the most part, they're all pretty harmless. Because what happens as an adult, which one of these categories do you fit in now? Well, none. You're an adult. You grow out of it. That's all it is. And, you look back and you go, did it cause any harm? Not really. Maybe you got a piercing you shouldn't have. Maybe you got a couple of tattoos that you're not super happy with, but they can get removed. That's about as bad as it is. But nowadays, there's this confusion around gender identity in schools. Like us, when we were kids trying to fit into these categories, this is what they are being forced to do. They're being forced to fit into these unusual gender categories. This is how they're defined these days. It's our responsibility as adults to let them make harmless mistakes. Let kids be skaters, let them smoke some weed, and let them be idiots. Let them grow out of it. However, the problem we have today is these adults and these authority figures are going way overboard. They're not only validating these temporary high school identities, but they're passing laws to support them, and they're rewarding kids for choosing obscure genders and even resorting to surgical or medical transition therapies. This is where the huge problem lies. You can't take these things back. Once it's done to this kid, look, there is no successful surgery for these people. When you're talking about when you're talking about genital surgery, this is not a successful surgery, especially when a male goes to a female. You're in surgery forever at this point. Maybe they'll get better at it in the future. I don't know. But at this point, it does not work. You have an sorry to be crude, but you have an open wound on your body. Your body just wants it to heal. That is not normal for a man, a biological male. That is not going to work out. You are going to be in and out of surgery forever. In fact, suicide rates go up for men who have had that surgery to get a vagina. It is what it is. That to me is such a telltale sign. Like, why are these people not paying attention to any of the statistics that are coming out? They just continue to force this stuff down not only these kids' throats, but society. And you're a bigot. You're a transphobic bigot if you have any problem with it, which is so wild. This has nothing to do with that. Look, behind closed doors, be whoever you want to be. And when you're an adult, do whatever you want to do. Don't force this on kids. Don't force it on me. I don't need to use your language. That's ridiculous. Otherwise, do whatever you want. It has nothing to be with... I am not against anybody in any way in that particular respect. It's just, man, I get a little heated. This stuff is very dangerous. You got to let kids grow out of these phases because these adults are causing long-term harm. And I think they're, like, to your point, like, is there justice? No, I think they're ruining the lives of these children under the guise of progress. And I find it very discouraging that no one in a position of power sees how dangerous this can be, or even worse, they know how dangerous it is, and they continue to push their own agenda at the cost of these children. So
it's the latter. They know how dangerous it is, and I haven't said this. I've felt this way for months and months, but people need to go to jail for this. The clinicians who are transitioning these kids and not giving them the proper information, they need to go to jail. And that's what I feel like justice looks like for these kids. And I know that that's a bold statement, but hear me out for a second. So GIDS, the Gender Identity Development Services in the UK that was part of the Tavistock Clinic, it has more or less collapsed over the last few years because of their mishandlings. And there is a great book called Time to Think by Hannah Barnes, who is a BBC reporter, and she broke down all of the internal documents that were floating around GIDS at the time. Here's what they knew while going through with these surgeries and treatments for kids. 38% had families with mental health problems. 1/3 claimed to have been the victims of harassment or persecution. 25% of kids referred to the clinic had spent time in care, compared to 0.67% of the general population's children. Upon referral, 84% had been living with their family of origin, but by the time of being discharged, this had fallen to 36%. 42% of kids had experienced the loss of one or both parents through death or separation. Close to a quarter of those aged over 12 had histories of self-harming, and the same proportion exhibited quote-unquote inappropriately sexualized behavior. Only 2.5% of kids referred to GIDS had no associated problems. 70%, on the other hand, had more than 5 associated features, including physical abuse, severe anxiety, school attendance issues, and many more. 35% of the kids being treated at GIDS had autism, despite only making up 2% of the population. And 90% of the females and 80% of the males seeking transitions were same-sex attracted. Now, they knew all of this going in. These are clearly kids who are suffering and have an extreme level of mental distress. How can your one-size-fit-all be, we're going to chemically castrate these kids? Because even the founder of GIDS back in the 1990s said that only about 5% of people seen at his clinic would, quote, commit themselves to a change of gender, and that the vast majority would just become homosexual. So as far back as the 90s, we knew what these kids were experiencing and how many of them would grow out of it, or how many of them it would be long-term. But getting into the hormone blockers as well is that, so GIDS were using a drug called triptorelin, which acts on the pituitary gland to stop the release of sex hormones, testosterone and estrogen, effectively halting physical puberty. These drugs are predominantly licensed and used to treat prostate cancer in men, but they have also been used in the chemical castration of male sex offenders. They are currently used as off-label for these transitions. So, how can you tell me that the same drugs that you use on sex offenders in prisons are now all of a sudden going to be life-affirming medication in another person? Just because of what's going on in somebody's head isn't going to change the physical outcome of this medication. It's insane. And there has been evidence within all of these clinics that changes in sexuality and sexual function, poor bone health, stunted height, low mood, tumor-like masses in the brain, and for those treated early enough who continue on cross-sex hormones, almost certain infertility. The use of cross-sex hormones can also bring an increased risk of range of possible long-term health complications, such as blood clots and cardiovascular disease. It's scary to say, but this is stuff that you'll read about in 50 to 100 years from now, on the same level as Nazi experiments, on the same level as the Japanese medical experiments of the Unit 731, I believe it was. This is legitimate evil that ranks at the top of history in terms of how bad it truly is.
Yeah, I mean, when you lay it out so thoroughly, one of the things that becomes very clear is that I think a lot of the parents that are being convinced that this is the right thing to do under this idea of democracy, liberalism, or progressive thought. I think they're being dragged through it, not realizing the amount of damage that they're causing. But to your point, anybody that's a part of the institution that is executing these things at any across the entire spectrum, all parts of the distribution chain, every single person, they clearly know, because the medication they're using and what they're doing and how just sort of lacking in efficacy their procedures are at this point, that they are doing these at the cost of the children. This is not for their own good. There's no way that that's the case. And you can't even really convince yourself, right? Especially when you're trying to confirm something that a child is saying that doesn't even have the mental faculties to make these decisions. So yeah, I mean, it's going down a dark path, and actually we're there. It's not going down a dark path. It is a long way down a dark path. And you know, I am inclined to agree with you that this is going to be a very sad chapter in history. But you know, I kind of get to this question, which is why? Why would they possibly want to do this? So if you think about, if you move up, more aerial view, think more macro, are these kids just basically being sacrificed to move an agenda forward?
So I think it's a web of a couple different things. So I think you've got highly distressed, mentally struggling children that are looking for answers to their problems. Then what you have is people with dark tetrad personality traits, which is narcissism, so a craving of unearned social status. Then you've also got Machiavellianism, which is people who seek power and control through manipulation and deception. You've got sadism, which is taking delight in the pain of others. And then you've got psychopathy. 1% to 3% of the population has these kind of things. These traits have been studied pretty in depth. And I think what has happened is those people have taken over these institutions, and they are using these kids for their own sick purposes. And then I think what's happening is because these people, like even Schellenberger, you know, the guy that we were just talking about in terms of the Brazil files, he recently did a big expose on the WPATH files, which is the kind of everything I'm laying out here in terms of JIDs, the exact same as what's happening in America. He was even saying, he's like, I've gone up against the CIA and nobody in my life has scared me as much as these transgender, the people that, the adults, the people that we see, the 50-year-olds swimming with teenagers, all of this kind of stuff. They're evil.
Yeah, I mean, the kids are confused. The people executing this agenda are evil. I totally agree. I just think it's more intricate than that, because society is all wrapped up in this, and it's become the primary focal point for this culture war right now. That's why I think it's cowardice. I think it's a very small percentage of these dark tetrad personality types are so threatening that most other people, like these clinicians and stuff, you only have to have a couple of them within your organization in order to scare everybody else into submission. And so, like, I don't think it's this big, everybody is on board. I think the vast majority of them are just straight up cowards. Except the only thing I would have to challenge you on is that it has worked its way into policy, into governments, around the world. Mm-hmm. And that's why I think, like, yeah, I hear what you're saying, and I agree with your perspective on how it doesn't take many to sort of move the needle in that sort of down that dark path. For sure, I totally see that. But this has gone beyond that now, that it's like there is, like, we looked at the number of days that are on the 2S LGBTQIA+. Wow, I nailed that. Yeah. We
Better than Trudeau.
Yeah, fucking crushed it, dude. I didn't trip over my words.
I will never apologize for standing up for an LGBTQ2+ kids' rights.
We look at how many days they have and how many months they have dedicated to them. This is deeper. I think that this is not just about how bad this is for children. I think this chapter is what this is doing to society as a whole. You know what I mean? It has become, like I said, it is the focal point of the culture war right now. You're seeing it all over the world. You can't, they're the most protected class now. Like, if you're a black trans woman, you're pretty much at the top of the Oppression Olympics food chain right now, top of the food chain. This is wild what we're doing. So I think that this right now may be the clear and most, the worst thing that we're seeing is what they're doing to children. Maybe because we have a soft spot for kids, or they should actually be the protected class. But I actually think this is an integrated, much larger strategy that is basically a cloud over all of society right now. I don't know how we get it under control, but I think it's much bigger than just this one issue.
Well, okay, let's put the tinfoil hat on for a second, and this is a tinfoil hat I've put on before, which is, all right, we hear at the World Economic Forum constantly all these politicians talk about how the world is overpopulated. It's, we've got way too many people on the planet. Jane Goodall was sitting on a panel in the World Economic Forum and said that there needs to be 500 million people is the sustainable level.
I think 1 billion would be fine. All right.
That means she thinks 7.5 billion people are a detriment to the world.
For sure.
And Jordan Peterson has raised a good point in this. When you say that, okay, let's say that you have identified that as a problem. It's safe to now assume that you want to provide a solution. What 7.5 billion got to go?
Yeah.
Who you're now going to obviously be making a decision. Now, let's say there was a depopulation agenda and they wanted to take that number down. Well, maybe you would infringe on people's reproduction and get them to have life-altering surgeries that makes them infertile for the rest of their life. Maybe you would make it extremely hard to get access to cheap and abundant energy, which is the life source of civilization, and like it's the sole reason that the population has grown at the rate it has, right, which is our ability to have energy. Maybe you would start pushing industrialized food that makes everybody sick and taking away their access to raw and organic foods and red meat and such. You would take away their access to nutrition. All of these things, if you look at all of these different aspects of this larger agenda, per se, you can fit them all in under a depopulation umbrella.
Right, and that's exact. So that was kind of the answer I was looking for, even though it feels tinfoil hatty.
I just don't like to go there.
I get that you don't want to go there. I can respect that, because honestly, it seems somewhat discrediting at times. But the reality is, the way that I've been able to frame this, and it's been a little janky, I apologize, but you're looking at the kids is one thing, then you're looking at it at a larger scale in society and how it's broken through culture and policy, everything like that, and how it's breaking in. I mean, for Christ's sake, they had a guy that was pretending to be a girl that worked in the White House, that was in charge of nuclear waste, that was stealing women's clothes at airports. The fuck are we talking about? All in the because of inclusion. Like, come on, guys, what are we doing? Anyway, my point is, this is obviously, this is clearly part of a bigger agenda, and that is a very reasonable answer, given that you kind of have to go down the tinfoil route to find the answer. So it is what it is. Yeah. I'm there for it.
And two, it's worth noting that it's really weird how, you see the pride flag everywhere. And even there was a recent point, I think it was about 6 months to a year ago, where there was videos circulating of them taking down all of the British flags in the public square and replacing them with pride flags, all the government ones. When you're trying to conquer a society, that's what you do.
Yeah, you steal the ship and you raise the pirate flag.
Yes.
Let's go. Yeah, 100%.
Yes.
That's wild.
We see them pulling down all of the statues of the people who have created our societies. We see them trying to rename Dundas Street.
Yeah, that's wild. That kind of blew up in their face, but yeah, totally.
For sure. But what they are attempting to do, for sure, is conquer our society and culture.
Interesting, because I always think, like, how does the empire fall? And maybe this is the way that they're trying to infiltrate it, to not necessarily make it fall, but to make it become their own. But yeah, that's an interesting perspective. I agree with that.
Yeah, and we've even seen Trudeau has said that Canada, back in 2017, has the chance to be the first post-national state. Now, what does post-nationalist mean? Post-nationalism is the process or trend by which nation-states and national identities lose their importance relative to cross-nation and self-organized or supranational and global entities, as well as local entities. So, at the same time, socio-political power is partially transferred from national authorities to supranational entities such as multinational corporations, the United Nations, the European Union, the North American Free Trade Agreement, and NATO. So, if you wanted to get rid of the idea of a nation state, like let's say Canada itself, you wanted to move that on, well, okay, we're going to rally around something that isn't a nation. We're going to rally around identities and groups. And then, yeah, you can cede all authority. It's like, oh, we're no longer a country. You can cede all authority to these international bodies.
Dark path, man. Dark path.
Moving on to the next story of the day here, we've got bird flu pandemic fear-mongering ramping up. The hype surrounding a potential bird flu pandemic being quote-unquote 100 times worse than COVID is starting to gain traction, reminiscent of the fear surrounding COVID before the last presidential election. John Fulton, a vaccine consultant, sparked this discussion with his comments about the potential severity of bird flu. The media's focus on isolated cases like dairy cows in Texas being infected adds to the sensationalism without providing a clear picture of the actual threat level. International organizations are advocating for a quote-unquote One Health approach to monitor the situation, similar to what was seen during the COVID pandemic. Vaccine manufacturers are already preparing for potential outbreaks, echoing the rush for COVID vaccines. While it's crucial to monitor and prepare for potential threats, it's equally important not to succumb to fear-mongering and maintain a rational perspective based on evidence and scientific assessment. So do you believe the WHO actually cares about global health, or is it just a helpful tool to increase political power?
So every time I hear things like this, I think about like what the goal of the organization was originally. I believe that the goal of the World Health Organization at one time or another was improving world health. I think that these organizations start with good intentions a lot of times. But then, Pournelle's Ironclad law of bureaucracy always kind of seeps its way in. And what that is every organization that has bureaucrats or bureaucracy over time becomes at least 50% bureaucratic. And then what happens is those bureaucrats overtake the people accomplishing the original goals of the organization. And then the organization basically exists just to continue to exist. And now they're trying to cede all this power to the WHO, so we have a one-size-fits-all solution. This is not what's good for society. Also, I think it's important to note, they're sensationalizing this 100 times more dangerous than COVID. There's nothing to back that up. There's no evidence to prove that. Also, its transmissibility between animals to humans and even from human to human is low. So these are important things that you should know as they continue sort of fear-mongering this topic in the media.
I think the WHO is completely captured and is just a political tool at this point. Do you remember in the early days of the pandemic when there was an interviewer talking to, it was actually a Canadian scientist that works with the WHO, but brought up Taiwan, and it just got super weird in the interview. Did you remember this?
I remember something like this, yeah.
So I pulled the clip, so she asks him,
WHO considered Taiwan's membership.
So for anyone just listening, the guy just freezes.
I got nothing to say about that.
Hello?
Wow.
I'm
sorry, I can't hear. I couldn't hear your question.
Okay, yeah. Let me repeat the question.
No, that's okay. Let's move to another one then.
And for anyone who's not sure here, when the civil war happened in China, the communists ended up winning the civil war, and the other group, the nationalists, they ended up fleeing to Taiwan, and they essentially started their own governance there. But China has never actually acknowledged Taiwan as a country. Neither has America, for that matter, actually.
No, officially no.
Officially, it is still under the banner of China, but they do kind of self-govern themselves. Now, so this guy just totally tries to squirm away from that question, and then when she tries to push him on that, he does the same thing again, and actually the call drops out. He just essentially pulls the plug.
I'm actually curious on talking about Taiwan as well, on Taiwan's case.
Just dips.
Like 100%, I'm out.
So then they get him back on the call and end up getting him back, and then this happens.
And I just want to see if you can comment a bit on how Taiwan has done so far in terms of containing the virus.
Well, we've already talked about China.
Well, how has Taiwan done? Well, we've already talked about China.
Yeah, it just shows you how politicized it is, right? It just shows you that it's completely captured. And look, I don't necessarily blame them for not getting involved in that conversation. I don't. But it does show you that it's completely politicized.
Yes.
And it's completely captured. That's what you see there.
Exactly. So, yeah, my whole point with pulling that up is they will allow politics to reign over health. Politics comes first, health comes second. And what's crazy is even, again, this is the same political party is in charge of China as back in the 1950s. And back in those days, Mao created a whole campaign around germ warfare. He essentially became a germaphobe. And you see this across all totalitarian states. Like Hitler was the same. He wanted to completely get rid of all pests and insects and rodents. And there's like this weird push for like ultimate sanitary conditions in like complete health focus, but it's not real health. But to the point where, quote, carried out like a military campaign, the drive to cleanse the country soon alienated large sections of the population. In Beijing, everybody was inoculated against plague, typhus, typhoid, and just about every disease for which there was a vaccine, whether they wanted it or not. Although the campaign did much to spread awareness to the causes of some diseases, it did little to improve basic health care. 9 months later, the Ministry of Health, in a self-criticism addressed to Mao Zedong, accepted that the campaign in 1952 had been based on coercion and had proved wasteful, quote, to the point where it prevented the masses from engaging in production and gave rise to discontent. You're like, that sounds familiar. Like you got so health focused that you shuttered the economy and then ended up having political backlash because of it.
Hey, humans just do these things. It's just, you know what I mean? I think that the difference is everyone thinks that when it's their turn, they're going to do it differently. Well, I'm going to do a better job, or I'm more righteous. I'm more this, I'm more that. My cause is more important, or whatever. It's usually based on narcissism and nonsense, but it's just repeating itself, man. That's all it is. It become very, very clear that through the pandemic that it's politics first, then health, right? And you can see it because the way they were censoring, the way they were forcing things on people, the way they rushed things through that didn't make any sense, the way that they actually pushed the science aside. And then said they're standing, their sort of big point was, you know, trust the science. That was kind of their big tagline, right? And it feels a bit like the Ministry of Truth, because it's like trust the science. It's kind of like the Ministry of, well, then it's kind of the opposite of what you guys are doing, right? Anyway, look, politics seem to lead the way. There's an election coming up. They saw value in creating fear and creating solutions for people. Is this something that they're going to run with for sure? Not necessarily. There's been very, very few cases. I don't know that it's going to get any traction, but you can see why they do these things. So one thing that I noticed the government does, before they pass policy or before they make big moves, they throw stuff out into the media because they control it. They throw out headlines and they just kind of gauge responsiveness to it. They go, what happened here? What did people think? How did they respond? How did they react? Can we use this tool? And we saw it too with the monkeypox thing. That was a big, monkeypox is next. Everybody hide in your house and everybody be afraid. Didn't happen. Everyone was like, hey, dude, fuck off. We're not playing this game. That got snuffed out super fast. Now it's been a while. And maybe they've got this bird flu idea that they might be able to push. Maybe this will work for them. I think that's all this is. I don't think this has anything to do with how severe it is. I think it has to do with, can they use it as a political weapon to gain more control? That's what I see this as.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, well, even Orwell made the great observation that all tyrannies rule through fraud and force, but once the fraud is exposed, they have to rely exclusively on force. And I think that's where we're heading, because to your point, I don't think people are buying these stories anymore. They know that this is a fraud. And so we'll see how willing they are to use that force. But heading on to the next story for the day, we've got over 28,000 foreign fugitives with active deportation orders missing in Canada. 410 of them have criminal records. So the Canadian Border Services Agency has disclosed these unsettling figures, revealing that 28,000 foreign nationals with active deportation orders are currently at large in Canada. Documents recently released in response to an inquiry of Ministry, spearheaded by Conservative MP Brad Redekop, disclosed these concerning statistics. Among this group, a troubling subset of 410 individuals with criminal convictions within Canada and an additional 236 convictions abroad. Remarkably, only 13 of those with criminal backgrounds are currently in custody. The government has articulated plans to address this mounting issue, with the CBSA setting a target to deport 80% of these foreign fugitives. However, this objective has drawn criticism with questions raised as to why the target isn't 100%. Despite these efforts, the true scope of the problem remains unclear, as no official figures regarding the total number of illegal immigrants in Canada have been published. So are we going to see this problem get better or worse?
Oh, we're clearly going to see it get worse. I mean, our population just went from 40 million to 41 million in 9 months. That's all based on immigration. Trudeau has even admitted it to this point. He put something out the other day. He was saying, oh yeah, this, he sort of phrased it in a way where he didn't try to take too much blame, but he was saying that all the non-permanent residents, well, it was more than we had expected. It was a lot of control. Our infrastructure couldn't quite manage it. Trudeau never admits fault. When he's saying, yeah, this was a mistake, that's a pretty big step for that man, right? So it's pretty clear. Then we're not really doing things the right way. And here's the thing. This is just 28,000 that we know of. Given that people are still pouring over the border daily, you know that this number is going to continue to scale up. In fact, according to Canada's government website, estimates from academic sources say that our population of illegal aliens or undocumented immigrants in the country is up to 500,000 people, although it may be more.
In Canada.
In Canada.
That's insane.
And the reason that's significant is this is something that's posted on their website, right? But if you think about how much immigration is coming into the country right now, how rampant it is, and how poorly we're paying attention to it, I would be willing to bet a significant portion of that 500,000 or more came in the last couple of years, which means that number is going to continue to grow very quickly. So 28,000, dude, this is a drop in a bucket of what's here. Let alone, is it going to go? It's already 10 times worse than they're saying.
Yeah, and, we sit here and see headlines about how there was a car stolen every 40 minutes last year, right? It's like, who do you think is doing this? Especially when you realize how these operations work, which is as soon as those cars get stolen, they're on a shipping container and getting sent to the other side of the world. This is all speculation, but I have nothing to back this up, but it's just a very interesting thing to think about. If you were a country on the other side of the world, and let's say you had a problem with people with incarceration rates, and okay, I can put the criminals of my country into prison and have my taxpayers and I have to figure out funds for them, or I can just ship them to the Western world and they're just out of my face. And you go, that to me, honestly, if I was a government and I had enemies on the other side of the planet, that might be a strategy I think about. So is that at play here? Are these people just coming over on their own, of their own accord? I don't think so. Somebody's got to be helping this stuff along in a way. And especially when even let's say it's not these governments in these very corrupt nations. Let's say they're not shipping them over. At the very least, the criminal organizations over there would be like, oh, wow, we can go over there and steal $600,000 cars and send them back here. Yeah, I'm going to send my low-rung people in my gang or in my group or whatever over there to facilitate this. Sure.
a couple of things that I would say that support your argument. Are governments shipping their people here? Well, what was one of the ideas they had in New York? One-way tickets, the fuck out of the United States. So the United States alone was doing that. They were taking immigrants and they were sending them anywhere they wanted to go as long as it wasn't here, right? So that was happening. And then when you talk about using the border for nefarious purposes, using that word nefarious a lot today, you look at what happened, I believe it's Finland right now. Is it Finland and Russia? Yeah. So they had, they've just joined NATO. And they had a border with Russia, and they closed it. And they were like, okay, we're just going to continue to close it, and da-da-da-da-da. And now they're closing it indefinitely. Now they have U.S. troops there. And the reason they're doing it is because they're saying that Putin was sending people over there to infiltrate their country, rather. They're saying, Russia is definitely using this to send people from other countries like Syria and Iran and other places from Russia into Finland to cause a bunch of trouble, so we're shutting down our border. So what's happening. And then let's take this into consideration. How many countries in the world hate the United States? Not all of them, but most of them. So that, okay, well, the Mexican border's wide open. Let's keep shoving people in there. They don't care about that. So there are a ton of people coming from different countries doing exactly what you're saying. And a lot of them are moving into Canada. It's so easy, like you said, for a criminal enterprise to sort of infiltrate here. I don't think people have the same disdain for Canada. But if you look at how you can be a part of our system and then just leech off us economically, easy place to go if you want to sit on the couch and do nothing. We're just going to take care of people. That's what we do here. When you look at that number, hey, there's 28,000 people that are, foreign fugitives in the country, and there's 410 with criminal records. First, we know the number's 10, 20 times higher. Second of all, I don't think there's much incentive for anybody in our country to deport anybody, because what does it look like right now? Trump is saying, oh, the largest deportation operation in history. And he's vilified in the media. So once you've let these people in the country that you probably shouldn't have to begin with, if you try to get rid of them, you're politically crucified. So what are we doing here? They don't even care. It's just, of course it's going to get worse.
We know that immigration has been very pivotal for Canada in the past to raise our GDP and stuff, but it gets into this very weird realm where we can no longer distinguish between positive immigration and negative immigration. It's just like now we have to accept it's all positive. There's no such thing as bad immigration, to your point. So then when you sit here and you go, oh, we've got criminal organizations taking advantage of the fact that we essentially have open borders right now. Well, we can't even address that because all of a sudden we're so sensitive to these topics that we're just going to be called racist or whatever.
So I actually want to highlight one thing too. I have a friend who's from Guyana, and he was telling me the other day that the general sentiment towards immigrants now is negative. People are like, oh, how long have you been here? And treating them differently, even though he's been here his whole life. That's actually, so it's not only are we are told by our governments and by culture and by the media that you can't ask questions or you're a bigot and you're against immigration, which I'm not against legal immigration. I'm for that. Yep. I have no problem with that.
Me too.
But now so that's you can't ask any questions, like you said. But how society's actually behaving is now they're actually against a lot of people that are immigrating to the country. Now society actually has disdain for them, which is a really bad situation. That is a generational problem we're creating right now.
It's the exact same thing with even the support for gay marriage and stuff in the States. We've seen this. For the first time in decades, the support for gay marriage has started to rapidly decline because they're pushing this to such a degree that it's detrimental. And I think we were even saying this before, where I am very careful to push any sort of discontent or frustration solely at the people that are in charge of making these policies and making these things possible. And I think that's so important to say because, again, you can't blame random people from very impoverished corners of the world trying to seek a better life. The blame of this entire situation and that negative attitude should only go towards the politicians who are making these things happen.
I totally agree.
All right, so next up, we've got Toronto Mayor pausing rain tax consultations after becoming an international laughingstock. Toronto Mayor Olivia Chow's proposal for a rain tax, officially a stormwater charge, has become an international laughingstock. Public consultations have been halted, but the plan to levy residents based on the amount of rainwater their property supposedly generates remains on the table. The justification for the rain tax hinges on the notion that properties with more hard surfaces like roofs and driveways contribute more to storm sewer overflow. While stormwater management is a legitimate concern, the proposed solution raises eyebrows. Critics point out the absurdity of taxing people for a natural phenomenon beyond their control. So what's the chances we see this exact same plan rebranded and then forced upon Toronto residents?
Well, you know what's interesting, actually? They're not even rebranding it. They're moving forward with it. They actually literally said that they'll be trying to bring this into play in 2027. But it for me, this is a problem because the purpose of a public consultation is to understand public sentiment. So, and the feedback obviously on the rain tax was overwhelmingly negative. So there wasn't even a point in having public consultations. Therefore, these elected politicians should obviously scrap this proposed policy and move the fuck on. That's the only thing that makes sense here. However, Chow is completely disregarding public dissatisfaction and moving ahead here. So for me, this is what Toronto gets for voting this woman in. To be honest with you, I guess that's the way this goes. Because what power do we have other than electing our officials? And this is what she's done so far. 10% minimum tax increase on property tax. And now this, which, let's be realistic, this is essentially just another property tax, right? And it's punitive on property owners versus condo owners, right? Because it has to do with what's under the sky, basically.
Yep.
So condo owners aren't really paying anything. If they are, it's a couple extra bucks a year, but it's someone who owns property that's getting heavily penalized. It's completely unfair and makes no sense. My issue again here is, why do we do public consultations if when you do them, they don't just say the things you like and then you just turn around and do it anyway? What are we doing?
First, the way they're going to decide who has to pay how much is by aerial photography and then guessworking, essentially, as to how much of your property is covered in this material or whatever.
My issue with that, though, is this. Look, they're also trying to draw incentive to be like, oh, well, make your property Draw in like, oh, what do you want me to put grass on my roof? Okay, let's say I'm stupid enough to put grass on my roof. Let's say I do this. Are you going to then reassess it? When
Yeah.
are you doing your aerial photography again?
Yeah.
You're going to do it, and then you're going to tell me to make these changes. But then when are you going to reassess these things? You don't have a plan in place. So why would I even bother? It doesn't make any sense.
But then even look at how poorly we just saw this week as well, the vacant home tax that the city of Toronto put forward, how terrible of a rollout that was, with 55,000 complaints in a week alone about people living in their homes being like, why am I getting a tax notice for having an in-vacant property? I live here, or I'm currently renting it. And even Olivia Chow went out and had to admit, they were like, yeah, this rollout has been utterly terrible. But like, so it shows that these people are completely inept.
Well, here's the thing. Anytime they're trying to add more complicated taxation programs into society, let's just say no. We're already one of the most taxed countries in the world, and now we're getting to this point that we want to tax the rain. We're done. None of this makes any sense. I don't care what a reason you give me. Spend our dollars better. You don't need nearly as much as you're getting. Like, reduce the size of your infrastructure. This is absolutely preposterous. When the federal level is increasing the direct federal workforce by 100,000 people, by 40% from 2015 to 2023, that tells you from the top down, this is being run so poorly, and they're using our money so inefficiently. Like, we did the math on it the other day. I think that government spending efficiency is literally 20%. 80% of our tax dollars get burned on bureaucracy. Enough of this shit.
For sure. And, you know, this leads us right into the last story of the day here, which fits perfectly. And hey, maybe if they need some money for rainwater, I found somewhere they can make it up from. CBC executives receive $15 million in taxpayer-funded bonuses amidst 800 job cuts. So the time has come for the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation and CEO Catherine Tate to ruthlessly slash 800 jobs while top executives pocket a staggering $15 million in bonuses. Tate, handpicked by the Trudeau government, justified the job cuts amidst crises of inaffordability, yet maintained that hefty bonuses were still in order for herself and her cohorts. This move, decried by many taxpayers, underscores a glaring disparity. As the CBC receives over $1.4 billion in annual taxpayer funds, its performance key metrics reveal an alarming 80% failure rate in achieving KPIs. So is it time for CBC to close its doors? Maybe, hey, there you go. You need some money? Take $1.4 billion from the CBC.
It has been time. It has been so much time. The government is funding this so that they control the narrative. That's what this is all about. Of course, this needs to stop. This is such a conflict of interest and not what's best for society in any way. You're not getting any, like, look, when you are the person paying, it's like, don't bite the hand that feeds you. So when the government is paying you, how can you possibly tell me that you're going to get critical journalism from anybody in that organization against the government for what they're doing?
Especially, too, when the leader of the opposition is threatening to cut off all funding to you. If you have both parties supporting you, then, okay, you're only biased towards the government as a whole. But when you have only one party that is saying, we will support you, now you're captured by that party.
100%.
For sure. Because if Trudeau doesn't get reelected, which God hopes that doesn't happen.
I don't know how it happens. Unless it's the UBI thing, I don't see how it happens. Even that might not do it.
Interference.
Yeah, fair enough. But now, how could you interfere at this level?
Aaron O'Toole just made the point the other week that that the Conservatives probably lost up to 9 ridings due to Chinese election interference, right? So,
but that was actually, you know what? When I listened to that, and I listened that Aaron O'Toole said that he goes, I actively knew that China was interfering in our elections, and I didn't say anything because I thought I'd be vilified by the liberals. You just showed me why you should never be the leader of anything.
100%.
Get the fuck out of politics, bro. You wouldn't stand up for the country.
Spineless.
Oh my God, you would not stand up for the country. Again, at that moment in time when you knew that China was interfering in our elections and you lost the election because of that, and you still did not have the balls to stand up and do anything. Buddy, get out. Just get out of here. But anyway, back to the point of CBC and any state-controlled media. If you want a free society, you want a democratic society, you have to have the government's hands out of media. The government wants media? Open up a Twitter account. Canada wants to say something? Use Twitter. You know it's coming from you.
compete
We don't care.
in the marketplace of ideas.
Exactly. 100%.
All right. Anything else you wanted to add before we get out of here?
Nope, that's it. That was a bit of a wild episode.
Don't forget to head over to our website to sign up for our newsletter, which goes out 6 days a week. BlendrNews.com, BLENDR news.com. And we'll catch you next time.
Bye, everybody.